November 22, 1963, 12:31 p.m. Dealey Plaza, Dallas, third floor, rear exit. The sound of the third shot was still bouncing off the concrete walls of the back stairwell when the door to the landing creaked. It wasn't a loud noise, but in the vacuum of a city holding its breath it sounded like a bone snapping. A man in a light grey jacket, breathing like a cornered animal, gripped the iron railing. His knuckles were white. His eyes, frantic and dilated, searched the dim fluorescent flicker of the hallway. He had exactly 25 seconds to reach the service door, blend into the chaos of the street, and vanish into a waiting black sedan. He didn't make it to the 10-second mark. From the shadows of the utility closet emerged a figure that shouldn't have been there. A man in a heavy overcoat, despite the Texas heat, with a fedora tilted low enough to hide his eyes, but not the jagged scar along his jawline. He didn't have a rifle. He had a snub-nosed .38 and a look of cold bureaucratic indifference. "Going somewhere, Lee?" the man asked. The voice was raspy, carrying the grit of the Bronx and the smell of expensive tobacco. To understand how a New York mobster, officially declared dead in 1935, was standing in a Dallas stairwell holding the most wanted man in history at bay, we have to look past the history books. We have to look at the Dutchman's tax. Because in the underworld, some debts aren't paid in cash, they're paid in silence. And Dutch Schultz was the ultimate debt collector. The shooter froze. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the distant rising wail of sirens from the plaza below. I don't know who you are," the shooter stammered, his hand reaching for the pistol tucked into his waistband. "The wrong guy to lie to," Schultz replied, stepping into the light. "You were supposed to be the patsy kid. But you're moving too fast, and I can't have you talking to the wrong people before the script is finished. The legend says Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone wolf. The reality, he was a wolf whose leash was held by a ghost." October 23, 1935, 10:15 p.m., Palace Chop House, Newark, NJ. Before the Dallas stairwell, there was the blood-stained floor of a New Jersey tavern. History records that Dutch Schultz, born Arthur Flegenheimer, was gunned down by the syndicate for defying the commission. They say he died of peritonitis, rambling incoherent nonsense about French-Canadian bean soup and the big shot. But history is written by the winners, and the syndicate won big that night, or so they thought. In the back room of the Palace Chop House, as the lead tore through Schultz's abdomen, a high-ranking official from the Office of Strategic Services predecessor was already waiting in the shadows. Dutch wasn't just a bootlegger. He was a logistical genius who controlled the numbers racket, the first data-driven criminal enterprise. He knew where every body was buried, every judge's price, and every politician's vice. "You're dying, Arthur," the man in the suit had whispered as Schultz slumped over his table. "But you can die in a hole, or you can die to the world and live for us. We need a man who doesn't exist to do the things we can't admit to doing." Schultz, coughing blood onto his plate, looked up. He saw the cold machinery of the state offering him a deal, total erasure in exchange for total utility. He took the deal. His ramblings on his deathbed weren't nonsense. They were a coded ledger of his assets, transmitted to the government agents listening at his bedside. The public saw a dead mobster. The deep state saw a new janitor. For 30 years, Schultz worked in the gray zone, neutralizing threats to the American status quo using the same brutal efficiency he used to run the Bronx. "Power," Schultz would later say to a young recruit, "is making people believe the monster under the bed is gone, while you're the one holding the flashlight." But by 1963, the monsters were getting restless. And the biggest monster of all was sitting in the Oval Office, threatening to tear down the very shadow empire Schultz had helped build. The Dutchman was back on the clock, and this time the target was the president's shadow. August 15, 1963, 02 a.m., Camp Street, New Orleans. 3 months before the shots in Dallas, the air in New Orleans was thick enough to chew. Dutch Schultz sat in a dimly lit office above a printing shop, watching a young, erratic man distribute Fair Play for Cuba leaflets. That man was Lee Harvey Oswald. Schultz wasn't there to stop him. He was there to groom him. To the syndicate and certain elements of the intelligence community, Oswald was the perfect disposable. He was a defector, a Marxist, a man with a fractured identity. He was a puzzle piece that could be shaped to fit any narrative. "Look at him," Schultz muttered to his associate, a man known only as the mechanic. "He thinks he's a revolutionary. He doesn't realize he's a prop in a play he hasn't read the script for." The plan was a triple cross. The mob wanted Kennedy gone because of RFK's crusade against organized crime. Certain intelligence factions wanted him gone because of the Bay of Pigs and his threat to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Schultz was the bridge. He was the only one who could coordinate the street-level hit with the high-level cover-up. He met Oswald in a diner on the outskirts of the city. Schultz wore a simple mechanic's uniform, his face aged by surgery and time. "You want to be a hero, Lee?" Schultz asked, sliding a manila envelope across the Formica table. "You want to be the man who changes the course of the world? Or do you want to be another footnote?" Oswald's eyes lit up with a dangerous, pathetic hunger. "I'm ready to do what's necessary for the cause." "Good," Schultz said, his voice dripping with a cynicism Oswald was too naive to catch, "because the cause needs a trigger, and then it needs a ghost." Schultz left the diner knowing the trap was set. But he also knew something his employers didn't. He wasn't going to let Oswald become a martyr. He was going to ensure the boy was the only one left holding the bag. In the game of shadows, the most dangerous move is believing you're a player when you're actually a pawn. November 22, 1963, 12:29 p.m., the Texas School Book Depository. The atmosphere inside the depository was stale, smelling of old paper and floor wax. Schultz was positioned on the 4th floor, 2 levels below the sniper's nest. He wasn't there to shoot. He was there to manage the exit. He watched through a crack in the door as Oswald took his position. The kid was shaking, his breathing shallow. Schultz felt a flicker of disgust. In his day, a hitman had ice in his veins. This was a circus. Crack. The first shot rang out. Crack. The second. Crack. The third. The world outside erupted. The screams reached the upper floors like a physical wave. Schultz checked his pocket watch, a vintage gold piece from his days in New York. 25 seconds, Schultz whispered. That was the window Oswald had to get down the stairs, through the back and into the car. If he stayed longer, the building would be sealed. If he left faster, he'd run into the first responders. It had to be surgical. But Oswald panicked. After the third shot, he didn't drop the rifle and move. He stood there, staring at the carnage below, paralyzed by the weight of what he'd done. "Move, you idiot!" Schultz hissed from the stairwell. Oswald finally turned, the rifle clattering to the floor. He bolted for the stairs, but he was 5 seconds behind schedule. 5 seconds that changed everything. As Oswald reached the 3rd-floor landing, he didn't see a clear path. He saw the Dutchman. "You're late, Lee," Schultz said, the barrel of his .38 leveled at Oswald's chest. I did it, like you said." Oswald was gasping, sweat slicking his forehead. "Now get me out of here. The car is outside." "The car is gone, Lee," Schultz lied. "There's a new plan, and you're not going to like your part in it." The escape route wasn't a path to freedom. It was a dead end designed by a man who had been dead for 30 years. November 22, 1963, 12:32 p.m., 3rd-floor stairwell. Oswald backed away, his heels clicking on the concrete. "What do you mean gone? They promised. Mr. Ferry said—" "Mr. Ferry says a lot of things," Schultz interrupted, stepping closer. The light from a small window hit his face, revealing the cold reptilian stillness of a professional killer. "But guys like Ferry don't run the world. Guys like me do. The guys who stay in the basement so people like you can play act in the sun." Schultz could hear the heavy boots of police officers entering the ground floor. The clock was ticking, but not for him. He had a badge in his pocket that would get him through any line. He had a face that no one remembered. "Give me the pistol, Lee," Schultz commanded. Oswald reached for his Smith & Wesson. For a second, it looked like he might try to shoot his way out. Schultz didn't even flinch. He'd stared down Mad Dog Cole and Lucky Luciano. A frantic kid with a god complex was nothing. "You shoot me and you die in this stairwell in 10 seconds, Schultz said calmly. "You give me the gun, and maybe you make it to the theater. Maybe you get to tell your story." It was a classic short con. Give the mark a glimmer of hope so they walk willingly into the cage. Oswald, desperate and breaking, handed over the weapon. Schultz took it, wiped it with a silk handkerchief, and tucked it into his own waistband. He then reached out and grabbed Oswald by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "Listen to me carefully. You're going to walk out the front door. You're going to act like a confused employee. You go home, you grab your things, and you go to the Texas Theater. Don't look back. Don't talk to anyone." "Are you coming with me?" Oswald asked, his voice small. "I'm right behind you," Schultz said. As Oswald turned to descend the last flights of stairs, Schultz watched him go with a look of pity. He knew Oswald wouldn't make it past the weekend. The janitors were already moving into position. The Dutchman had done his job. He had redirected the target toward the trap. But even Schultz didn't realize how deep the betrayal went. November 22, 1963, 02:15 p.m., a safe house in Oak Cliff. While the world mourned and the sirens screamed, Dutch Schultz sat in a nondescript apartment 3 blocks from where Oswald was being apprehended at the theater. He was cleaning his 38. A man entered, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than the apartment building. This was the architect, the link between the syndicate and the higher powers. "Is it done?" the architect asked. "The kid's in custody," Schultz said, not looking up. "He didn't use the back exit. I steered him out the front. He's rattled. He'll start talking soon." "That's a problem, Arthur," the architect said, pouring himself a drink. "We can't have him talking, not even a little." Schultz paused, the cloth mid-stroke on the barrel of his gun. "The deal was I deliver him to the police, so the lone nut theory holds water. I didn't agree to a hit inside a police station. That's sloppy." "That's New York in the 20s. We're supposed to be better than that now. The situation has changed. The president is dead, but the brother is still very much alive. Bobby will tear the country apart to find the truth. We need a permanent ending." Schultz felt a familiar coldness in his gut. It was the same feeling he had at the Palace Chop House in 35, the feeling of the floor falling away. He realized then that he wasn't just the janitor anymore. He was a witness. "You're going to use Ruby," Schultz stated. It wasn't a question. Jack Ruby was a 2-bit strip club owner with mob ties and a desperate need to be a hero. He was exactly the kind of loose cannon Schultz hated. "Jack wants to do it for his country," the architect smirked, "and for his friends." "Jack is a loudmouth," Schultz spat. "He'll mess it up. You're trading a controlled variable for a wildfire." "That's why you're going to be there, Arthur. To make sure the fire only burns the right things." In the underworld, loyalty is just a word used to keep the help from screaming. For Schultz, the price of survival was getting higher every hour. November 23, 1963, Dallas Police Headquarters. The basement was a hive of reporters, cops, and cigarette smoke. Schultz moved through the crowd like a shadow. He wore a press badge pinned to his lapel, his face partially obscured by a camera he didn't know how to use. He saw Oswald being moved. The kid looked terrible, bruised, terrified, but still clinging to some shred of defiance. "I'm just a patsy," Oswald yelled at the cameras. Schultz locked eyes with him for a split second. In that look, Oswald realized the truth. The man who had helped him in the stairwell wasn't there to rescue him. He was there to watch him die. Schultz saw Jack Ruby leaning against a pillar, fidgeting with his hat. Ruby was sweating through his suit, his eyes darting around. He was a disaster waiting to happen. Schultz moved closer, slipping his hand into his pocket. If Ruby missed, Schultz wouldn't. 25 seconds, Schultz whispered to himself again. That was the time it would take to move Oswald from the elevator to the transport car. But as the crowd surged, Schultz felt a sharp pressure in his back, a gun barrel. "Keep walking, Arthur," a voice whispered. It wasn't the architect. It was a man Schultz recognized from the old days in Newark, a hitman for the Genovese family who was supposed to be dead. "I see," Schultz said, his voice steady. "The cleanup crew has a cleanup crew. The commission doesn't like ghosts, Dutch. You've been out of the loop too long. You thought you were working for the government. You didn't realize the government and the commission are the same boardroom now. The trap wasn't just for Oswald. It was for the last man who knew how the old world worked." November 24, 1963, 11:20 a.m., Dallas PD basement. As Jack Ruby stepped out of the crowd and pulled the trigger on Oswald, the basement exploded into chaos. Cops tackled Ruby. Reporters screamed. In the periphery of the madness, Dutch Schultz was being led toward a service exit by the Genovese hitman. They were walking through the same kind of dim, concrete corridors where Schultz had confronted Oswald 2 days prior. "You know how this ends," the hitman said. "A quiet alley. A robbery gone wrong. The Dutchman finally stays dead." "You always were a talker, Vinny," Schultz said. Despite his age, Schultz was faster. He didn't go for his gun. He grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with the leverage of a man who used to break legs for a living. The hitman's nose shattered. Before he could recover, Schultz had him in a chokehold. "You tell your bosses something," Schultz hissed into his ear. "I built the numbers, I built the roots. You guys are just playing in the house I painted. If I go down, the ledger I gave the feds in '35, the real one, it goes to the New York Times." It was a bluff. The ledger was long gone, destroyed in a CIA fire years ago. But in the world of crime, a legend is more dangerous than a fact. The hitman hesitated. That hesitation was all Schultz needed. He disarmed the man and pushed him down the stairs. Schultz didn't run for the exit. He ran for the phones. He called a number he hadn't dialed in decades, a direct line to a certain office in Washington. "This is Flegenheimer," he said when a voice answered. "The Dallas operation is compromised. The syndicate is moving on your assets. If you want to keep the lid on the president's death, you need to pull me out now. Or I start talking about the New Orleans meetings." The silence on the other end lasted an eternity. "Where are you?" the voice finally asked. The Dutchman was no longer an asset. He was a loose thread that could unravel the entire American century. December 1963, an undisclosed location, Arizona desert. The heat was dry, a far cry from the humid rot of Newark or the swampy tension of Dallas. Dutch Schultz sat on a porch, watching the sun set over the mesas. He was officially dead, again. The government had moved him to a retirement home for people who knew too much. He was guarded 24/7, not for his protection, but to ensure he never spoke to another human soul. The architect visited him one last time. "You won, Arthur. You're the only one who made it out of Dallas alive. Oswald's dead, Ruby's in jail, the commission is happy, the bureau is happy." "Nobody's happy," Schultz said, lighting a cigar. "You just traded one set of lies for another. You think the people won't notice the smell of the rot. The people believe what they see on the evening news, and they saw a lone gunman get what he deserved. It's a clean story. Americans love a clean story." Schultz looked at his hands, the hands that had built a criminal empire and then helped bury a president. "I had him in that stairwell. 25 seconds. I could have ended it there. I could have handed him over and told the truth." "Why didn't you?" Schultz smiled, a grim yellowed expression. "Because I'm a racketeer, and in a racket the truth is the only thing you never sell. You keep it for leverage." The architect left, leaving Schultz alone with his ghosts. He spent his final years writing. Not a confession, but a map of the grey zone where the law and the lawless shook hands. He died in 1968, his passing unrecorded. But the Dutchman's tax is still being paid today, every time a file is redacted or a witness disappears. The official Warren Commission report consists of 889 pages. Nowhere in those pages does the name Arthur Flegenheimer appear. There is no mention of a man in a fedora in the third-floor stairwell. There is no record of the 25 seconds that could have changed the world. But in the backrooms of New York and the dark corners of Langley, the story persists. They talk about the Dutchman's Gap, the moment when the most powerful forces in America almost lost control of their narrative. Oswald was the trigger, the syndicate was the hammer, but Dutch Schultz was the safety. He ensured the mechanism worked, even as it crushed him. Why does this matter? Because history isn't just a series of dates and names. It's a series of choices made in the dark. The choice to kill a president, the choice to silence a witness, the choice to believe the lie, because the truth is too heavy to carry. Dutch Schultz once said, "A man who can't keep a secret is a man who can't keep his life." He kept his secrets until the very end, and in doing so he became a part of the very shadows he once managed. Today, Dealey Plaza is a tourist attraction. People stand on the X's marked on the pavement, looking up at the 6th floor. They never look at the 3rd floor rear exit. They never think about the man who was waiting there with a watch and a warning. But the next time you hear a story that sounds too clean, remember the Dutchman. Remember that for every lone wolf, there's a handler in the wings. And for every truth, there's a 25-second window where it could have been told, before someone stepped out of the shadows to close it. Would you have taken the Dutchman's deal to survive? Or would you have told the truth and faced the consequences in that stairwell? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the crimes that built the world we live in today.